Land swaps, you'll see, is very short. I couldn't find any examples that were around ag. So the basic concept, and we haven't done a lot of work on land swaps, they get talked about all the time. In fact, I don't think I've ever been in a meeting where land swap has not been said, even like over dinner. But there's very few actual applications. It happens in the province. There are examples where something is of value for a purpose and the province owns it, and somebody owns private land that has more value to the province and they swap. So it's very, predominantly it's done publicly owned land, privately owned land. The value of each of those is better for the other. And so they swap. They happen. I haven't seen one from an ag perspective, and maybe somebody else can add to that. Did you have something to say, Bob? Or? No. Okay. So I'm sorry, that's not a very in-depth part. If I find something, I will send it on, and they can pass it around. So, and the only reason I included that was not to tell you how little I know about the subject, but it was in the letter that went out to all of you. I figured I'd better address it without ignoring it. So the last piece that I don't think was in the letter, but I wanted to include anyways, just given this conversation that we're having here, is conservation directives. This is another tool that is in the Alberta Land Stewardship Act. It's really interesting, and it doesn't really fit with the other ones. And the reason I say that is essentially what it is that if the government deems a piece of land so important for public benefit, they can employ this. So they can issue what's called the conservation directive onto that property. As far as I understand it, we'll get into this in a sec, but it's registered on title, it restricts the usage of that. The landowner can receive compensation, we'll talk about that again in a bit, but it's not a voluntary one. Conservation easements are voluntary. Participation in a TDC program is voluntary. This is not voluntary. It will come through a regional plan. We don't really know how it's going to get put in place or any of those things, but in circumstances like this, if a municipality wanted, maybe not even circumstances like this, just in general, but if a municipality felt that this was something that was really important to their overall planning, they could probably ask for it. So I just wanted to introduce you to it. I'll be honest, when I first heard this, it was actually from Minister Morton. He came down to address an Action for Agriculture meeting that I was chairing, and I was sitting right there, and he was talking, and suddenly he described this thing, and there's a photo of me doing this. What did he just say? So they're different for sure, and we're not sure where they came from. We actually did a whole bunch of background research to try and figure out where they came from, and they're new. They're Alberta. So what it says in the Act is a regional plan may permanently protect, conserve, manage, enhance environmental, you've seen this list before, natural, scenic, aesthetic, or agricultural values by means of a conservation directive expressly declared in a regional plan. So this is something the regional plans are built. They highlight this specific piece of land for some reason of value that fits these criteria, and it can be named that. It's non-voluntary. It is a restriction on the land use. It's not an interest in the land, so it's not like an easement, which provides you an interest. It doesn't do that. It simply puts restriction. And it is placed onto... Oh, it may be placed on an interest in land. So if there were an easement or something else, it can be put into that. It's enabled through the ALSA, as I've just said, and through a regional plan. This is what they can be used for. We've already done that list of things. So environmental values, natural, scenic, aesthetic, the ones we've already seen. So the purpose and ag, and so the purposes are similar to conservation easements and TDCs, but again, they're not voluntary. At this point in time, I would say very little is known about them or about the administration requirements. However, what is very clear is that the precise reason for doing it has to be identified very clearly. There must be the intention of what it is, whether it's protection, conservation, management, and it's subject to specific parcels of land. So it must be named. It can't be an area or a criteria. It must be a specific piece of property. The landholder, the title holder of that property, must be notified of its purpose, and you also have to notify them. They would have to be notified that they are eligible for compensation and how that process works. It's pretty unclear within the Act as to what that is. The regulations will have to clarify that. As far as I know, they're not in draft. Again, this is something that I think if there was a push to use it in regional plans, maybe it would step up as to whether those regs were written or not, but at this point. And so the regs will outline who is to give the notice. The regs will describe what kinds of terms and conditions need to come around it. Who the enforcement body is, they'll designate who will enforce that, how it's to be registered and recorded, and then if there's any amendments or termination opportunities in it. The other part is that there is an appeal provision, but only around compensation. So you can't appeal that they asked you to now have a CD, but you can appeal what value you would be compensated for as a landowner. The appeal, is through regular review. It is outlined how that appeal process would happen in the Act. It does say, and this is really interesting, compensation is a right. So it's a right, that's what it says, which we're, we spend all this time talking credits and units and things like that, but this one, that's a right. It's quite clear. It does say that the Crown will pay the compensation, and this is one of the reasons that I do not think this will be used a whole bunch. But as I say, I didn't want you to go read ELSA and see that it's there and say, why didn't you talk about that one? And so, I mean, that's a lot of money. If you're going to start paying that way, it's a lot of money. The other is, though, you have to apply. So they tell you that it's your right to have compensation, but if you don't ask for it, you don't get it. So it's, there's a process in there. It is fairly clear, too, that the compensation will be based on a decrease in market value, so similar to a conservation easement, I would guess, but also for damages as per injurious effect. And so how are you damaged personally? And I think you'd have to make a pretty strong case on that. Like, that's a pretty gray area. And I think it will be kept reasonable. I don't think that there's going to be a whole bunch of craziness that happens. And then damages for other losses as specified within the regulations. Yeah, I'll look at this one. So if there was to be a valuation disputed, it goes through a compensation board. Title holders may choose to have the valuation fixed. So if there was something offered and they decided to appeal it, and they can decide that whatever the court says, that's what we're going to go with. As far as the municipality goes, their role is fairly unknown, as is much around this, and it's likely to be pretty limited, but that last point is sort of what I was indicating before, that if there's not a regional plan in place, or if it's in progress and the municipality has certain lands that they want to really highlight, they could probably put that forward as a recommendation. Lower Athabasca has none of these. South Saskatchewan, as written to date, has none of these. So, as I say, I don't think they'll be highly used for a whole bunch of reasons, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. The other tool that I did not talk about today, and is also in ELSA, and I'm not going to talk about it, is conservation offsets. And mostly I didn't, because that really, for the most part, involves an industrial use with private land, and so it's something that I can send you some information on if you wanted to share it, Debbie or Monique, but it's, I just figured it maybe didn't fit quite so well today, so.